Hi guys, it's Kelly Lanovola here and I'm back with another video for WPlus9. Today I'm going to be using some products from our newest release, and also I showed you some products that I didn't end up using. I originally had a totally different idea in my head when I started, and I thought I was going to be using the No One Else stamps and dies. It didn't end up working out that way, but I did use the Just For You stamp set and the floral border. So when I started doing this, I just have I've cut the border out of just like scrap pieces of paper because I wanted the girls to look like they were in a field of flowers, and I needed to know how high I have to stamp them up. I'm working on Canson watercolor paper because I wanted to do a scene, but I wasn't really feeling all of this masking. So I just didn't do it. I'm stamping these in intense black ink from Simon Says Stamp because I am going to be doing some Copic coloring, but also this is waterproof as well, so I can do my watercolor background, and it's not going to bleed or run or have any issues. I did end up stamping this twice because I'm stamping on watercolor paper, so it's textured, and so sometimes it's difficult to get a good impression, but also because these are fine line detailed stamps, I wanted to make sure that my lines were good and crisp. Here I have cut the floral border, one of them a very narrow band at the bottom, one of them a little bit wider, and I'm just using my craft pick to poke out all the little areas in the middle. These are, again, cut out of the Canson watercolor paper because that's how I'm going to color them. Was feeling really all I wanted to do when I started this was I just wanted to sit down and color with my Copic markers. But I wanted to kind of set the scene, and I was feeling a little bit lazy. So I picked out some Distress Oxide colors. I'm working on a Ranger craft mat, and I'm just going to smush them down to create a palette. I'm going to start with a number 2 round brush from the Silver Brush Company. And all I'm doing is just painting clean water around my images. Don't worry about getting right up next to the black line. Once you add color, you'll be able to see it. Just be more concerned about going over the lines because your pigment will run wherever it is wet. And sometimes I do have to go back and make sure that the line around my little girl stays wet, that it's not drying back too much. And it can be, like I said, a little bit difficult because you're painting with just clean water. A lot of times I have to tilt my head to the side to make sure I can see the sheen of where the water is going. But you don't have to get right up to the black line. You'll be able to adjust it without it looking weird or strange once you have added the color to it. So after I am done putting the whole border around all of them, I'm going to go in with a bigger brush. It's a number 8 round brush, and I'm going to go in and just spread the water as far as I want my pigment to go. I'm really just concentrating on the bottom at the beginning. I do take it partially up so that I have a nice soft blend from my field to my sky. But right at the beginning, I did not take it all the way up to the top of my card because I don't want to get too much green into my sky. And like I said before, it will run wherever you add the pigment. So I've switched over now back to the number 2 round brush to add my pigment, just because that number 8 really does hold a lot of water, and I didn't want to have to worry about putting so much more water back onto the paper. I already have enough on there to get my pigment to move. So I'm using the Lucky Clover and the Twisted Citron. I'm going to carry that up past the girls. Basically, what I'm trying to create is just the illusion of a softer flower field behind them. So right now, just working with the greens, it's going to start to look a little bit crazy when I start to add the other colors. But this is one of the things that you frequently hear with watercolor is don't judge it until it's dry. Because here, I'm adding in the pink. I'm going to go in and add a little bit of, the pink is picked raspberry. I'm going to add a little bit of carved pumpkin and then also squeeze lemonade. And it's going to kind of look like a hot mess. It's not going to look very pretty. But that's because it's wet. And it looks totally different when it's dry. So much softer and more blended. So I'm just going to add that till I'm happy. On the right-hand side there, it did kind of get a little bit muddy with the orange and the green. So I'm just blotting that up. And then I'm going to flip it around because that's just easier for me. And I'm going to carry the water the rest of the way to the edge of the card. And then I'm going to add in some Salty Ocean for my sky. Again, I'm not taking this directly, right up next to the girls. I'm going to worry about that later. And then I'm just making sure that I have some darker and lighter areas, because the white areas, the areas that stay white, will give the illusion of clouds in the sky without me really having to do any work about it. Now that I have the color down, I am going to go back and bring the color to the edge of the girls. And honestly, I didn't do it in every single line. There were some that it just made more sense to bring it to them, and the other ones I kind of left it softer. For the bottom, I felt like I lost a little bit of that depth from the Lucky Clover, which is my darkest green color. So I'm just adding some more of that back in. I'm going to blot off any of the edges where water is pooling, and especially was for me in the sky area. And then once I have that excess water blotted off, I'm going to just set it aside to dry. From there, because like I said, I was feeling lazy and didn't want to mask anything. Now, if you aren't confident in your ability to do what I just did and you think you're going to get color everywhere, there are products out there that you can use to mask the girls. I just was not feeling it. So here I have my 2 watercolor floral borders, and I'm just going to add color the same way. I'm not being very particular. I'm just adding on like the same colors. And I do carry it all the way down to that, I guess, cut strip, because you will be able to see part of that when I put the card together. So I started with my greens again, just using that Lucky Clover and the Twisted Citron, just to get some, pigment down. And then I will start painting in the flowers with the same exact colors that I used before. So the picked raspberry, the carved pumpkin, the squeezed lemonade. And sometimes I, mix them in. I started with the picked raspberry, and sometimes I let the carved pumpkin kind of, here on this one over here, the carved pumpkin, it's such a strong color. It's one of the newest Distress Oxide colors, and I haven't worked with it very much. I love its vibrancy. I think it's totally beautiful, but it is a very strong color, and so it was kind of overtaking a little bit of my pink, honestly. So that's something to just keep in mind if you're going to work with that color. Using the squeezed lemonade to fill in the rest of those flowers. And then I'm going to pick up, a little bit of picked raspberry and drop it into my carved pumpkin, or a little bit of my squeezed lemonade and drop it into my picked raspberry, just to get a nice kind of blend. Somehow I forgot this top leaf up here, so I needed to go back in and get it. I also picked up some of the Salty Ocean and just kind of dotted that in for a different look. Again, set those aside to dry. We're going to start the Copic coloring. This is completely dry. Just want to note that. You don't want to start on wet paper. So this is totally dry. And then I just really love the contrast of like the bolder Copic colors with the super soft background. I think it's really pretty. Originally in my head, I had the idea of doing a very soft ink blended background with these 2 girls, just kind of in front of it. But again, like I've said, 3 times now, I just was not feeling the masking process, and that's what changed my mind. So I'm coloring them with the same color combination, and I'm doing both of their shading, I guess, at the same time. It just seemed easier to me to just go ahead and knock it out. So I typically color as if my light source is in the top right-hand corner. I did take a little creative liberty, because if my light source is in the top right-hand corner, the girl on the right-hand side who's bent over, her face would be darker. And she's so pretty. I just did not want to darken out her face. I just didn't. So again, a little creative license, if you will, because I wanted my card to look a particular way. So as far as the shading is going, I always start with my lightest color and work out to my darkest color. And then from my darkest back out to my lightest. For both of their faces, their hair is kind of covering their face, so they'll be shading around that. They'll be shading underneath their chin, on their necks. For the little girl on the left-hand side, her arm that's in the that's further away, which would be her left arm, is going to be slightly darker. There's going to be shading underneath her skirt, and then I always add just like a little C shape underneath their knees. Because if you look at somebody who is standing, the highlight is on their kneecap. It is not on across their whole leg uniformly, because your kneecap sticks out further from your body. The same thing with her elbow. I did add some shading to her elbow, but I did not add the darkest color there because it is bent, and so that would be slightly lighter. For the girl on the right-hand side, again, her hair is over her face. The way that her neck is bent, there's definitely going to be more shading there. Her hands are on her knees, so there's not a lot of shading going on there. I really just kind of added the shading more toward the inside of her body where her sleeves are, and then just a little bit at her wrists and to one side of her fingertips. Where her hands are resting on her legs, there would definitely be shadows, and I did that same C shape with her kneecap, and then just along the inside edge of her leg. This is going to look really dark, guys. I'm just FYI, if you've never seen me color with this particular color combination, the darkest color is an EO4, which actually the name of it is Natural Lipstick, I think. And it does look really dark. However, Copics are transparent. So if you put a lighter color over a darker color, it is going to lift up some of that pigment. And this, I have found, who did I get this color combination from? I think Marika, I think is who I picked it up from. But it really does blend out to a nice kind of soft peachy pink color. And so again, I'm just going in and adding the same shading where I have been adding it, to make sure that I have some just really rich color that's going to give me some depth. Now, there are times where I'm not adding the darkest color, like with the little girl on the left's elbow. On the right-hand side here, I didn't take it all the way down the inside of her arm. And now that I have that in, we're going to start working back out toward the lightest color, which is typically when I start to fill in more of the area. I like to leave myself a generous highlight because I am heavy-handed. So if I start with my darkest color, then everything's just dark. I don't know why I can't start. Like, I just can't. I think it's just because whatever color I start with tends to be the color I use the most of. And that's just how I roll. But there isn't a right or a wrong way to do this. If you can get a good blend and you're happy with it just doing it one time, then just do that. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. This is just my approach and what works for me. So again, we're expanding that color out a little bit. You'll especially see that here with the E00, because the only parts that are going to be left behind are the highlights. So on the little girl on the left, that's going to be her cheekbone and the tip of her nose, the top part of her arm, her right arm that's closest to us, the little top of her kneecaps. For the girl on the right, it's going to be, again, her cheekbone and the tip of her nose, the left-hand side of her arm for her left arm, and the right-hand side for her right arm. For her legs here, I am going to cover over her kneecap because her hand's right on top of it, so it's not going to have that bright white highlight, but the outside edges of her legs will. And I do cover the entire, I guess, coloring, whatever it is, the entire leg, the entire arm, with my lightest color, because this one is a little bit more yellow based, and in order for everything to blend correctly and just have uniform color, I found it's better to cover the whole thing with my lightest color. So again, it is going to look a little bit dark. It's because we have nothing left to, we don't have anything to compare it to except for really soft watercolor. So just hang tight because it will get lighter. Your eye will perceive it to be lighter. So I did add some blush on their cheeks and then colored in their lips. If your blush seems to be a little bit too stark, you can go back in with your lightest color and blend it out. For the girl on the right, I did have to do that. I'm using the same color combination for both of their hair because depending upon how much you use of each color, you can totally get a different color. So for my girl on my left, I'm going to make her a little bit more blonde. So hers is, the highlight's going to be across the front of her bangs because it rounds out, and so the highlight will be right across the middle. And then she has this one cute little curl that's sticking out of her little, what is that, like a little handkerchief? I guess that's what you'd call that, a little handkerchief. So for the girl on the right, her hair is in this braid. So this piece that's coming out from the front, almost like a little bang or like a side swept bang, the top of it's going to be the lightest part, and then it will be darker underneath. The side of her head will be the lightest. The shading will be mostly in her part, and then where her braid starts to gather. So again, I'm using the same color combination, but for her, I'm going to make her hair darker. I'm going to use substantially more of the E57. I don't even think I used the E59 for the little girl, honestly, the little girl on the left. For this girl with the braid, she's got a lot going on here, but Dawn's, the illustrator, the owner of WPlus9, she's done all the hard work for you because she's already put in these lines where things should be darker. So if you just follow your lines and do the quote unquote cast shadows, you're already going to have like half the battle of the shading down, honestly. So I'm doing the flicking motion. I'm just using the tip of the marker. There are times where I'm going to continue that line up a little bit higher. For the braid, I'm really just mainly concentrating the darkest colors where those braids are like where the folds of the hair are meeting each other. And then it's tied in like this little cute little bow at the end of there. And so it will be gathered there as well on the end of her hair. I didn't add a ton of the darkest color, this E59, just really where I wanted there to be some real darkness. And I'm not being very careful to blend this out because I want it to look like strands of hair. I want it to have some highlights and some lowlights. For that lock of hair that's kind of falling over her face, you just want to make sure that you're going with the shape of that. So your strokes should be a little bit more rounded. Because if you just do straight lines, it's going to look a little bit funny because that's not how it's drawn. So again, we're working back toward that lightest color, and really for me, for my style of coloring, things always come together with like the last two colors ish. And this isn't something like, if you go through it and then it still seems messy or it still seems not as contrasted as you would like you can play with this as much as you would like. Here, I'm going to go back in with a little bit of darker color because I felt like I missed one of the cast shadows. I also felt like this lock over her hair that falls just didn't have enough dimension, so I went back and added some darker to that. So just don't feel like you have to, you do A, B, C, and then if you don't like it by the end of C, there's nothing you can do with that. That's not true. If you don't like it by the end of C, then add a D. It's totally fine. I started, you might notice from the photo of the card that I ended up doing her little handkerchief pink, but I started with it white. So I wanted to get all of my white coloring done and out of the way. When you're coloring something white, you're really just adding the shadows. You want to leave white areas in something that you're coloring white. So I'm just really adding in the darkest color to where those lines are already drawn. Again, like I said, Dawn's already done all the hard work. She's basically told you where you need to shade. And I think a lot of times people are a little bit overwhelmed by images like this. Like they feel like it's too detailed or that they can't color it correctly. If you look at the stamp and there's lines drawn in it, then the artist has already done it for you. You just have to add shading where those lines are. That's it. Or you can just color it with a solid color and it's still going to be pretty, or do a 2-color blend. It doesn't have to be as detailed as I'm being. This is just my specific preferred style of coloring. So I did her little blouse white as well. Again, I'm just adding shading to where those lines already exist. The only exception to that is underneath, like where her handkerchief is sitting on her shoulder. I added some shading there. And then I added some shading to where her little jumper strap is. This, again, is going to look very dark because we don't have anything else that we are comparing it to. So right now, it doesn't look like they're wearing white. It looks like they're wearing gray. By the end of it, they will be wearing white, I promise you. I started doing her socks white, and then I changed my mind. So I did put in just like a little bit of shading with that C1. And this is one of the benefits of starting with your lightest color, because you can completely cover it up and nobody will ever know the difference. So I did she has like a little apron on top of her skirt. So I'm doing that white, and then I'm also doing her socks white. So for here, again, we're just following the lines that are already there. You want to, just use the tip of the marker. You want to make sure you leave white areas when you're coloring something white. And then there's a little like fold at the end. And so I'm just going to add a little bit of shading to let that like flip of her apron just right along the line. For her socks, I'm going to extend out the little divot that's already drawn into her socks that give them kind of like that ruffly look. And then where her straps of her shoes are over her socks, I added some shading there as well. From here, I had a hard time picking out the colors for what I wanted these little girls' outfits to look like. And so, and P.S. I forgot to shade the trim on this little girl's dress. So I did go back and do that. I just didn't feel like it was necessary to show it to you because it was such a small area. But anyway, so I struggled with my color combination. I wanted something that was going to pop up off of the background, but I also wanted something that was going to be, complementary to the flower colors that I had going on. So I decided that I was going to do her dress like a yellowish orange. So for her sleeve, it's kind of bloused out. So I'm adding shading like into her armpit. I'm extending a little bit of the shading from the top line where it's kind of drawn, ruffled. Same thing on the right-hand side. Her braid and her shoulders kind of hunched, she's bent over. So her shoulders kind of hunched over. There's going to be shading next to that braid on the left and the right-hand side. For her skirt, like in the center, that's going to be quite a bit darker. It's not going to have really any of the highlight color because it is bent over. I also added some shading at her waist since that's bent. And then again, she has that little kind of fold or flip of her skirt in the back. And so I'm adding a little bit of shading underneath her apron and then right along that line of where the fold is. These are... you probably don't have to use 4 colors, honestly. That's just where my comfort zone is. But you could definitely shade this with, 3 or 2 and still get a very pretty result. When I color, like most of you guys, I'm coloring to just kind of de-stress and kind of forget about, things that I'm struggling with in my regular everyday life. And so I just like to go in and do what makes me happy. Coloring makes me happy. So maybe for you, it might be, the watercoloring in the background. That's the part that you want to spend the time on. For me, it's the coloring. And that's why this video is so long. Because I do talk a lot about, shading and things like that. And if it's something that you're interested in learning, I don't want to cut it out of the video. So for this little girl's dress, it's kind of like blowing in the wind. And you'll see that I leave myself a white highlight right next to the line on the back. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to make it look like the fabric is moving. So I am leaving myself a lighter area. There's going to be shading where her skirt is kind of, folded in itself where it's flipped up. And then definitely underneath like her little tushy there's a line to add some shading. Where her arm is crossing over her body, there would be shading both on her chest and kind of on her stomach. And then working back out to, you can see there's a huge white area left here. So I'm going to start filling that in. I wanted her dress to be a light blue. I thought that A, it would be complementary to the sky color in the background, and B, I don't know why I think they're sisters. I don't know, probably because I grew up with 3 sisters. I keep thinking in my head that they're sisters. But anyway, her sister's dress is orange, which is blue's natural complementary color. So to me, it just felt like they would go well together. I picked some pinks that matched that kind of picked raspberry feel to color in the flower that she is giving her. And I just very quickly filled that in with my lightest color and then did a little bit of flicking from the center. I colored in the actual center, I think with a Y08. But this isn't, you know, I'm not doing a whole lot of shading here. I just want there to be some depth in the middle. And then while I was doing this, I was looking at this little girl and I'm like, that is a lot of white. That is a lot of white. So I decided to make her little handkerchief pink. And so I went over it with my lightest color. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. You could leave this like this because we already have the shading in there. But I wanted it to be a bit brighter. So I did end up using those same colors to go over and do the same kind of shading so that it would be a little bit brighter and it would pop off the page. I'm going to use a C5, a C7, and a C9 to do their little shoes, their little patent leather shoes, which, like the time frame that these girls are drawn in, I think that was a very, very popular look. That was kind of like when I was growing up. My mother dressed me in little patent leather shoes with like ruffly white socks with my little dresses when I was in preschool. Yeah, my mom definitely did that, probably to all of us. So for this one, because they are a little bit shiny, I want to make sure that I'm leaving a highlight. You can leave it as you color, or you can go back in and add it with a white gel pen. There isn't a right or a wrong way. You can do it either or. I was a little bit more successful at leaving a highlight on the little girl shoes on the left, but I did end up kind of bolstering that highlight up with my white gel pen. I also gave the little girl in the blue dress a little polka dot pattern just to kind of make things a little bit different. I like to outline all of my images, so I'm going to go ahead and go in and do that. With something this detailed, I would recommend only outlining it if you're extremely comfortable with line work. So my original game plan was at the top to do the kindness matters. And it was too large. That's just what it came down to. I really love the sentiment and I totally plan on using it in another card, but it was just too large for the scene I had going on here. So I ended up using a sentiment from the same set, which says a little something just for you. I love the combination of the type font with the script. I think it's super cute. For the largest watercolor flower piece, I'm going to use Tombow Mono Multi Glue and glue that down flat to my card panel here. And I'm just trying to get the placement right for how my flowers are going to look. I decided to make it flush with the left-hand side. That's not true. I put this one in the center and just glued that down flat. And then the other one I will make a little bit more flush with one side or the other. And then I'm just trimming this off. I did this before I mounted it to my card base because I find it easier to do the trimming when there's only one layer to compete with. But you can see that because we use the same colors for the watercolor, they blends pretty seamlessly into the background. Here I've put a bunch of very teeny tiny little pieces of Scotch foam tape to pop up this other layer. Foam tape is so funny to me because like when you put it on your card and you want to move it, like that thing's knocked down like Fort Knox, like government secrets are being held behind your Scotch foam piece. When you're doing little pieces like this and all you want to do is peel off the backing paper, I cannot get those things to just sit where I want them to sit. So frustrating. So I usually hold them with like one fingernail. So I put that down so that the top piece is kind of popped up. I'm going in with some clear Wink of Stella because I love all things glittery. And so I got the flowers and then the little orange dress for the older girl. And then that is the whole card. So I really love the way it came out. I love how that floral border is a little bit whimsical. And the girls are drawn in kind of an older style, but it all marries well together for a complete card design. So thank you guys so much for joining me and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.